having commitment to something. Yeah, it just kind of motivates you, makes you think like, man, you know, like to stand up for something, to have that discipline. Those are the people who motivate me. People who are working hard in that way, you know, and willing to give up anything just to stand on the morals of what they believe.
Nothing you do matters unless what you do matters. I'm Amadon DellErba, and this is Get Real or Die Trying. How we doing, tribe? Amadon DellErba here with the Get Real or Die Trying podcast. We are in Arizona here. I'm super excited to be sitting down with Cliff Matias. He is the founder of Redrum Motorcycle Club. It's an international Indigenous club. He's got chapters all over the world, and he's done a lot of other things and founded a lot of other things we're going to talk about. I've been following his story for years now, and I feel blessed by the Creator that I got to meet him and sit down here in beautiful Arizona. So, how you doing, brother?
Hey man, thanks, man. Thanks for. I've never been here, so I got a little check this little park out. Nice.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I'm stoked.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start with who you are and your story. You know, you grew up in the Bronx, Brooklyn. Yeah, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah.
And yeah, let's kind of start with your story. Let the audience know a little bit about your upbringing and.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a low, moderate, what you might say, lower middle income home. You know, my dad was owned a collision shop, like a body shop. You know, my mom was stayed home. I had big family, brothers and sisters. Just grew up in the street in the late '60s, early '70s. You know, and you just you weren't allowed in the house. You know, like God forbid you walk into the living room. You know, back then you got chased out of the house. You know,
yeah.
So we just just run around the streets until dinner time. You know, so yeah, I kind of grew up in that life. Grew up on the streets. I grew up with a really pretty tough dad. My dad was like probably the toughest man I ever met, which kind of worked against me a lot of times because I was never afraid of anybody. Because I knew, I was like, well, I care about this guy when I go home. I'm going to get my ass kicked by the toughest guy I ever met. But, we it wasn't like we were abused or anything like that. It was just how it was back then. Me and my brothers we were pretty bad. We were bad kids. I mean, we were good kids, but, we just got into mischief,
Yeah.
And I, was part of the New York City school systems at that time and just ran around the streets and boxed. My dad was a fighter, and so I got into boxing really young as a kid. We used to, back then, you had barbecues. Everybody was always, having barbecues. So we'd have barbecues, and the uncles would bet against the kids. We don't beat the shit out of each other with gloves on, and the uncles would be drinking beers and watch us all beat each other up. But back then, you had to be good with your hands, because the streets were. That's just how it was. Everybody scrapping all over the place. That was pretty much how I grew up, and then I got really disciplined in fighting and boxing, and I won the New York City Golden Gloves, and which back then was huge. That was in Madison Square Garden, so
wow,
it was a completely different element.
Were you like 17 with that? Or?
Yeah, I was still in high school. It was just my last senior year of high school, and.
Wow, so you fought in the famous Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, in the same ring as Ali Frazier.
The greats, yeah.
Back then the gloves were, if you won the New York, I was on the back page of the Daily News, and when you won the gloves back in that day, it was like a celebrity status,
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing. All the greats, Joe Louis, Sugar Ray Robinson, all the greats were Golden Glove winners, so that kind of put me on the track of whether I wanted to be a pro fighter,
Yeah.
But being in that, I used to train in Gleason's, and I was surrounded by pro fighters. I sparred with Saul Mambi, who was the welterweight champion of the world at that time, and
wow.
was in the ring with some great guys. So it kind of gave me an insight. I was like, I don't think I really want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Which kind of broke my dad's heart, 'cause
yeah.
he was one of my coaches, and but I just wanted to do other things. But it opened the door to a lot of healthy living, from my time. Like a lot of people, weren't into health and fitness where I grew up, on the street. So, during my youth, during that time, boxing opened the doors to really kind of taking care of myself, right? So, because I ran a lot, did a lot of leg work, I started getting into running races and got into cycling, and we always swam, and so I started doing triathlons. And so I got into that, and I was like winning triathlons like all over the place, and bike racing. I really enjoyed the single sports competitiveness of, I never got into team sports. I never got into basketball or baseball. I just loved that pushing myself and challenging myself as a kid,
Yeah.
So that kind of...
You got instilled with discipline too early on with that.
Yeah, I did have a lot of discipline as a youth, and I'm grateful for that I was able to apply that, into my life. And listen, there's tons of other things like math that I wasn't disciplined at.
Yeah,
In
me either.
So I picked and choose what I was going to be disciplined with.
Yeah.
But being athletic opened the doors to caring for myself and taking care of myself, which was difficult at the time. Also because I had a brother who was, on the streets and was addicted to drugs and alcohol, who eventually disappeared, and that gave me a special connection to the MMIW causes that the club does. But living that, because we never had closure, but I got to see the harm of not caring for yourself and not taking care of yourself. So it got me really thinking about being a good athlete and just being a good steward of taking care of myself,
Very cool.
Yeah.
So where along the lines did you start tapping into the indigenous, roots and culture? And
I grew up always, my grandma was always, reminding us, of our indigenous roots, and my parents would go up to Canada and check out some powwows at the time, and so I always was kind of really into my indigenous roots, more so than a lot of other people in my family. My grandmother always used to tell me I looked like my grandfather and her father. She always go, he was the leader of his people, and you look like him, and that kind of really inspired me, So got me, it really connected me to the inner mind, body, and spirit of who I am,
Yeah. Which is, Puerto Rican, and what else?
Yeah, even my dad would always say he's, he always acknowledges indigenous Puerto Rican roots, even when he would always remind us, because the Caribs were the tough native people of the Caribbean. They were often at war with the Tainos, so he'd always say, "I'm Taino, but I'm Carib." He's like, my dad he's 88. He's still like a tough dude now, But he always, reminded of us our indigenous roots, and then my grandmother was part Quechua, and so she, always reminded us of. So I kind of grew up with that constant reminder of my indigenous ancestry.
Very cool. So you've been involved in a lot of activism and protecting the earth, protecting families and people. I know you were involved with Mauna Kea.
Yeah.
And I saw that you did some work with Jason Momoa.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What did you guys do down there in Hawaii?
Well, Jason and I were at Mauna Kea at different times.
Yeah.
Jason, we both have been up there twice.
Okay.
Mauna Kea was a special sort of thing for me. I had saw what was going on. I lived in Hawaii at the time too, and I had saw what was going on. I moved back to the mainland, and I noticed this amazing woman named Pua Case, and I just was like, I have to. She was sort of at the forefront of this movement, the Mauna Kea movement, and I just knew I had to connect with her. And so I took a trip back to the Big Island, 2015, and I borrowed this jalopy car, and just like barely made it up to the top of, if someone has never driven up to the summit of Mauna Kea, it's like a long drive, but it'll push any vehicle. And I just made it to the top, and the car just kind of putted out, and I made it up to the top of Mauna Kea, and I'm like, and that there was a camp there. People were already camped out, protesting, and Auntie Pua wasn't there. She was down sign waving at the bottom of the hill.
Oh,
so
shit.
I was like, oh man, so I stayed up there and then the next day I went down and sign waved. I finally connected with her, who she also has Taino roots, so it was really amazing to connect with her. And she just became my auntie from that moment on, and a special connection to Mauna Kea. So I started really, supporting that movement, the Mauna Kea movement. It was another year or so later that people became so inspired with that movement, right? That Standing Rock.
That's right.
And Auntie Pua was part of that Standing Rock movement because, at the very beginning, they kind of had, she was like, you should make a camp. And they were like, well, you think we can get 50 people? And Auntie Pua was like, if you make a camp here at Standing Rock, you're going to get more than 50 people.
Yeah.
And, that was a discussion that she had with Auntie LaDonna.
Yeah.
And who's passed.
Yeah.
And they both became aunties of the club, our grandmothers, our guides in the club in Redrum, It was a very sad time when Auntie LaDonna had passed, and we all went there and led a procession and took her on her last ride, because she was a rider, She grew up with her late husband. They used to ride to Sturgis together, and so it was really important for us too. And Auntie Pua was a big part of that. And so that movement, how the two movements were combined on their own, so it sort of fit the mission of what we do, the mission of myself as a human being, to stand up and be part of that.
Yeah. And so how long did you spend at Standing Rock?
I wasn't there that long. I think I was there. I was in Standing Rock twice.
Yeah.
I was, it was like less than a week each time. I still, had a lot of commitments. And, But the second time I went out, it was like in the middle of the winter time. It was during the snow.
Yeah, that was some heavy stuff they were dealing with.
Yeah, Nako was filming his Love Letters to God at that time in December, and Auntie Pua was there. So it was a really good meeting of everyone.
And did you see Clyde Bellecourt there?
On our first visit to Standing Rock, Redrum and the American Indian movement had a moment together. And the crazy thing is that with the public information release, the files of the security, the government security, had put out a blast about Redrum and the American Indian movement joining forces, and to be cautious and keep an eye out. So both myself and Clyde ended up on this list. So later on, I found out that I was on an arrest list. If they can get me doing anything over there. So they were really threatened. The powers that be were really threatened to see Standing Rock at Standing Rock, to see Redrum and the American Indian movement joining forces there. So
that's cool. Yeah,
I didn't know about it at that time, but years and years later, when the information was released to us, I have the files of all that. So I never released it to the public, or some things that just don't have to. But.
Yeah, I was blessed to meet a lot of the founders of AIM. Clyde, Dennis Banks, Russell Means. My father was friends with them. He did interviews with them too, and spent time with my family, and great men,
Yeah, great.
And
great
legends, and they're all gone now, so
they're all gone,
there's a responsibility I feel for other men to carry the torch, and the American Indian movement had a lot of impact for years, and
I would never put myself at that level that they are, pale in comparison of the work that they did, and especially at that time, right, in the 70s. And
Yeah.
but you know, we all do what we can do in the ways that we can, and sort of, you know, to create a flow, create a movement of people, and that's kind of, you know, how I feel, you know, that we're all sort of just like these little rocks, you know, building this wall, and we all get together. And so, I mean, a lot of times people will, because I'm the international president of this club, right? So, but it's, you know, I'm just a small part of everything. There's so many brothers who are working hard and making things happen internationally, right? 'Cause we're an international club. People often go, well, you know, you're an indigenous-based club, but you have a chapter in Spain or you have a chapter in France. But what a lot of people don't really understand is that we create allies, right? Like these movements can only be so strong with only ourselves.
Yeah.
And so by creating allies, like we have allies now in Spain, in Germany, who are allies to our causes, you know, as indigenous people.
Yeah.
And they have shown up. I mean, they've come out and jumped on planes and flew over to the States, you know, to support things. And that's really what our idea is, you know. And then also connecting people to the earth, you know, reminding them and everyone, right, that we're all on this earth together.
Yep.
And if everyone in their communities, you know, took care of the earth and where they are and thought of caring for the water and in those sort of ways, that how much better would the planet be, right? So getting a bunch of guys in Germany to connect to the earth, to connect to the ground that their ancestors are buried on, and create a relationship with that, and that mindset is powerful.
Yeah. And I saw you've been to Brazil, New Zealand.
Yeah.
Did you do some work with the Maori in New Zealand, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have a Maori chapter there, and then I have connections with other indigenous leaders there.
Yeah.
You know, every year I try to get to the Permanent Forum on Indigenous People at the United Nations.
Yeah.
And so that's a great place for indigenous people to connect, to network.
Yeah.
You know, we might not be able to get everything done in the countries and communities that indigenous people are in worldwide, right? But it gives us opportunities for indigenous people to connect. And so the Permanent Forum is a great foundation for that to happen, you know.
And you organized a Indigenous Peoples Day March in Washington, D.C.
So I was part of because it was, and it was an Indigenous Peoples March, but it wasn't Indigenous Peoples Day March.
Okay, so it wasn't.
So it was, I mean, it happened in like February.
And I think the march that you helped organize had kind of a viral element to it when those Catholic college boys were very disrespectful to the elder.
And it was wild because I was getting interviewed at that moment on this side, and the interviewer was like, "Hold on a second," and he had taken off and went over there, and we didn't even really, I couldn't even see like that was going on over there, because there were some other groups of people that were sort of instigating something on that side, and so we were kind of involved in that, not knowing. And you know, the Creator works in mysterious ways, because I thank goodness all the time that I didn't make it over there.
Yeah, you might have been back to the Golden Gloves days.
Yeah, man. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, and they just kept me away from the side that Nathan's on. You know, because Nathan, you know, is like an uncle to us, and we look after our elders, and we just didn't know, and that Nathan was over there. And the two Keith and my other friend Roberto that were on that side, you know, they were good friends of ours, so it just worked out best. The way it did and the way it panned out.
Yeah, well, that video, you know, it's a sad video, but it really actually I think it kind of helped, because it really showed the world the dichotomy of what was going on there. You have this very sacred element in this indigenous elder and doing something beautiful, and it showed the other end of the spectrum, the lack of connection, the lack of awareness, the insults. I don't want to get too political, you know. They'll see the story, but I think that I remember seeing that video and thinking, it's very sad that happened, but I'm glad it was captured because I think it brought more awareness.
Sure.
And that did kind of go viral on social media, and a lot of people were outraged, and these things can happen. You've been to a lot of protests and marches and different things, and I have too. I was really involved in 2012 and 13 with the Occupy Wall Street. And,
I remember. You were there?
I was all over the country. Yeah, in Zuccotti Park too.
Yeah.
Did you go to Zuccotti?
I made it over there.
Yeah.
I
was interviewing people and capturing media, and we had press badges, and we were in the streets, and I got arrested actually.
Did you?
And the 1 year anniversary.
Okay.
And spent 11 hours in a holding cell with about 300 other people. That was great, great experience. Only time I've been arrested in my life. And but what I always noticed is what's going on in the streets is very different than what the mainstream media wants to tell the world. And of course they focus on the negative stuff.
Sure.
So there could be 50,000 people, literally 50,000. Like in Chicago, I was at the NATO summit in 2012. 50,000 people in the streets, beautiful. Reverend Jesse Jackson was there. A lot of different indigenous people as well, marching from all over the world. And there was the Antifa, the Black Bloc, causing some problems with the police. So all the media just zooms in on that, the violence and
of course.
This and that. When it's just a handful of people, make it look like it's a bunch of banshees in the street when there's literally 50,000 people marching peacefully,
I always say, if you send out a press release that you discovered the cure for cancer, and then another press release that there's a riot on 42nd Street, the media is all going to run to the riot. No one's going to attend the cure for cancer.
Yeah.
So it's just how it is, man.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, I do a men's retreat called True North, Men's Development Camp.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen with men in this world.
Sure.
And tapping into what it really means to be a good man. And in this culture right now, there's, in my opinion, an attack on, traditional values of what it is to be a man, a protector, a provider, decisive, a decision maker, convicted, their word means something. And I'm interested in your take. You grew up in the inner city, you grew up with, like you said, a very strong father in that culture. And have you evolved? Have you changed some of your thoughts, or what do you feel like it is to represent, as an older man who's lived, a very colorful life? And what is it that you want to pass on to young men? Because young men today, to me, are really lacking the qualities of what it means to be a good man, And there's kind of a weakness and a lack of conviction in young men, especially, 19, 20, even millennials, guys my age, even really. And, my father's, he's older, he's 78, he grew up in the inner city too, in the ghetto of Pittsburgh. And Italian culture, and gang violence, and the whole deal, very similar to you. And I remember we were talking on the phone, laughing about getting hit over the head with a metal trash can lid, and street war, and all that happened with him. And as he went into a spiritual life and became a spiritual leader and teacher, he talks a lot about the need for men to step up to the plate. And when I see, your videos, and I see good men that you work with, we're going to introduce one here soon, who are standing up for our women, standing up for the abuse that's taking place. We need these examples. We need to inspire other young men to step up to the plate. What do you think about all that?
I feel like in this day and age, men have become more reliant on being emotional than being logical, right? As men, I grew up, especially that I have sons that are younger, and I always goof around. And my youngest son, who kind of grew up more with his mom than with me, and so now he's in my life a lot more. But I remember yelling at him, we got yelled at all the time.
Yeah.
And I just remember yelling at him, dude, not really. I mean, I've never spanked him when he was a kid or anything like that. But I just remember he stopped talking to me for 2 months because I yelled at him, And it was just a reminder. He's not like that anymore. Now he yelled back at me. But the fact is that I think that we as men can't allow our emotions to lead us. We have to get back to being logical and thinking about the things that we need to do. I think that's one of the first things, right, is that we need to get in control of our emotions, because emotional men, they often say, are dangerous men. And we're not saying emotions like, oh, I feel bad when someone gets hurt or someone passes. You're allowed to have that emotion.
Yeah.
We're talking about being involved in discussions or issues, right? And then allowing your emotions to take control of your actions.
Yeah.
And I feel like our young men are allowed to do that now, or being encouraged, I'd say, right?
Yeah.
Being encouraged to do that, to lead with their emotions, instead of leading with the common sense of sitting back and overlooking, viewing the situation before you act.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the primary things that's happening. It's like young men are just leading with their emotions.
And not being protectors, not having a sense of
right.
protecting the women in their lives, the people in their lives, whoever they're with. If I go into a room with my family or anyone, I'm going to assume the position is I'm in charge of protecting everybody around me.
Like I never sit with my back to the. Always sit with my facing the door. Or these like old school sort of thing.
Me too.
If you're walking with a woman, she's always walking on the inside. You don't never let her walk on the curbside or. Just things like that. People often think you open a door for a woman just because it's chivalry. But you're walking a woman around the car and opening the door for her for a lot of reasons. One of them is to protect her.
Yeah.
You don't know what's coming, who could be approaching on the other side of the car, or what vehicles are coming up. So there's a lot more than just chivalry.
Yeah.
It's also some of these old school actions are based on being protectors, like being. So I come from that, protector, provider. My dad, those are like some of the lessons that I was taught as a young man. To be always be the protector and always be. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how, because again, a lot of women or single women are raising boys, right?
Yeah.
And they haven't really been taught that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of men who aren't even stepping up to the plate in that respect, right?
Yeah.
Having children and not caring for them,
Yeah.
I wasn't married, but I had two boys. I was very much in their lives all the time.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I would hate to say I was the greatest dad. Sometimes I sit back and go, I wish I could have been a better dad, but I made sure I was in my children's lives.
Yeah.
And that didn't mean seeing them once every other week.
Yeah.
But again, depending on the circumstances, some dads just have no choice.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the murdered and missing Indigenous women movement. And bringing in awareness to the lack of respect for women, and especially Indigenous women, but really women in general, but especially Indigenous women in that specific movement. I know that you have supported that, and you were in Arizona last week, and Emily Pike, bless her soul, was missing, and her remains were found, and so you came out, and the Red Rum, crew did you transported her body, right, back to her home. And supported that. You want to talk about that a little bit? And
I've had this is a special, missing and murdered Indigenous people and Indigenous women, but in general, that as I had mentioned before, is a special place in my heart, because I have a brother that has never been found. There's no closure.
Yeah.
So I know what those families are going through.
Yeah.
When Emily was asked, was found in such a horrific way, just tossed like trash on the side of the road. The club has relatives of her that are members of the club, and we were asked by the family to bring her home.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like we weren't there to protect her at that time.
Yeah.
But at least we can bring her home and feel that we're protecting her spirit, and making sure she's safe as she's was brought back home. One of our spiritual leaders of the club, Kris, he was instrumental in that, and conducted the ceremonies to lay her finally to rest. And Kris is here. I don't know if we
Yeah, let's bring him in.
Yeah, let's see. Kris, come on over, brother. And Kris is a young man in the club, but he's a spiritual leader amongst his people, and he's a spiritual leader in the club. He's a great example. He's a man that as such a young man, I inspire to be like him, you know.
Good evening. My name is Kris Dosela. I'll go ahead and say a welcome in my language, which is Akimarotam. Skughurenik Visichamwe. Anya Napchigit Christopher Dosela. Anya Amjad Kuriakimur. Or Anya Gomki Chichino Amjad. And I'm happy to be here today. I'm originally from the Gila River Indian community, but I am also part San Carlos Apache and part Navajo as well, from New Mexico. But I've been living in Arizona my whole life, and I'm a part of the Redrum Motorcycle Club First Nations. I'm part of the Valley of the Sun chapter, and I'm happy to be here today.
And the most important part, he's one of the spiritual leaders of the club. He's a very humble man, but he is a spiritual leader of the club, and there are very few of those members of this club, and these are men, young men, sometimes there's a few elders as well, who are examples of who we want to be, and they're well versed in their traditions and culture, and that's an important part of the club. It's an important facet of what Redrum is about. And so Kris teaches a lot of people in ways to be closer to their traditions and their culture. So I thought it'd be really important for Kris to be here today.
Yeah, beautiful.
So, I have this tab, spiritual leader, this patch here, but I'm really involved with my cultural teachings and traditions on my reservation. And I come from a family of very traditional people. My grandfather was a medicine man, healer, seer. A lot of people seeked him out for healing and for whatever sicknesses they had. And that's not something that we go around saying, but it's also not something that just anybody can do. And so, but I have a really deep love for my songs and my culture that I'm trying to keep that alive. So outside the club, I have a group, a traditional group. Then we travel all over. We're called Chichino Spirit, and we've done really big events like an NBA halftime show, the Final Four, men's Final Four last year at State Farm Stadium. And then we also do local things where we just go to an elementary school and just share with the children. So, but again, but in regards to the club, I will be asked to share a prayer before an event, or before a ride, before our meetings, different things like that. I'll be asked to share some songs. And then one thing that some of our brothers do is they also do a ceremony called Sweat Lodge. And so I've been taught how to lead that as well from my father. Being indigenous, we're only 2% of the population in the United States. And when you think of that worldwide, we're like the smallest population on Earth. Wow. And so that's why it's like my mission to be on top of like trying to preserve it.
Yeah.
And then, and like people who've taught me, my father, he went to foster home. Didn't even speak English during the 50s. And then my grandparents, all boarding school Indians who were forced to speak English and beaten for speaking their language. Yep. So I'm trying to grasp what they still have and preserve it. So the question in regards to Emily Pike, I don't like saying this, so I'm just going to say it for your records, but I am a relative of Emily Pike's. She was my niece. Her mom and myself were second cousins. And so I didn't know that. But I don't always say this on camera either, but I did have a chance to meet her. And that's something really intimate for my chapter of Redrum. We did purchase Christmas gifts for Emily Pike. And so that is something that when we received the news, it was really heartbreaking for us. And we're determined to find out if it really was her, if that was the same girl that we bought Christmas gifts. Because again, her being in a group home, we weren't allowed to know her last name and where she's from and all that. We just knew she was Native and her name was Emily.
So the San Carlos chapter, I mean, not just San Carlos chapter, but the Redrum in general, here in Arizona, during Christmas time, they purchase gifts and stocking stuffers and things for the youth. And so they purchase gifts for the children that were part of this community home, right?
Yeah.
And so that was, that's something they do every year. It's just some of the work that the club does. Yeah, touching on what he was saying, yeah, that's one of the things with the club, is that having Indigenous, all over the planet, right? So like the Maori brothers in New Zealand and brothers in Australia and the different mobs, as they call them, people. That's what the groups in Australia call themselves mobs. So the different mobs in Australia that we have in the club, our brothers in Tahiti, our Indigenous brothers in Thailand and Singapore. So yeah, it's beautiful to bring people together that are in tune with their culture and traditions, and then those that want to learn more.
Yeah. So what's next for you with Redrum, and where do you see the future going?
Yeah, well, in the immediate future, we'll be at Gathering of Nations powwow at the end of the month, and we're going to lead a motorcycle procession into Gathering for missing and murdered Indigenous women. We'll be doing that with our sister club, Red Spirit. So we have a group of women in, Redrum is just a men's club, but Red Spirit is our sister club. That's the female members of the club. And so we'll be doing a ride to honor MMIW, MMIP, and then also, Emily Pike there at Gathering of Nations. Every year we do an amazing ride at the Sturgis, a motorcycle rally called the Veteran Warrior Ride. So it's a ride for homeless, shelterless vets in the Rapid City area. So we do that. We have chapters like all over the world. Every weekend there's just rides and guys just doing, and women, men and women doing such good work in their communities. And that's really the whole mission and idea of the club, right? It was just to get people to connect to the work as humans that we can do to make this place a better planet, community, where, depending on how you view it, But we always say, if we care for our communities and that spreads out, right, eventually we could all be caring for this planet. And that's what we try and do, get each of our communities to work hard and in doing something positive. And we have a saying, it's positivity on two wheels. Like that's our motto when we first came up with the club. Like, it's not any disrespect or unshine, you might say, to what other clubs are doing and their missions. Every club has their own mission. It's just that our mission is just this.
Yeah.
It's no greater or better than anyone else's club mission or what their club does. I always say, hey, God bless them. It's just that this is the work that we do.
Yeah. So, who are some of your heroes? Who do you draw inspiration from in the past or growing up, or were there any particular figures or people that inspired you and kind of shaped your thinking?
Yeah, I've always was inspired by people like who believed in something and stood by it no matter what, and so many, you take like Muhammad Ali, for instance,
yeah,
who stood so firm on not wanting to go to war,
yep,
that he gave up his heavyweight crown.
Yeah.
Like the greatest thing on earth, right? to him.
Yeah.
And he gave that up.
Yeah.
And so when you see people having commitment to
Conviction,
something, yeah, it just kind of motivates you. It makes you think like, man, you know, like to stand up for something, to have that discipline. Those are the people who motivate me.
Yeah.
People.
Me too.
Working hard in that way, you know, and willing to give up anything just to stand on the morals of what they believe.
Yeah.
And so I hope to be, you know, that every day I wake up, you know, trying to be a better person.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of like stupid stuff in my life, a lot of things that I'm not, you know, proud of. When I reflect on them now as a young man, I'm like, man, I don't know what was on my mind. But every day I try to be a better person, and that's really, I'm not perfect, but every day I just try to strive to be that much better.
Yeah, man. That's what it's all about. The pursuit, man. We're all in pursuit of, not everybody is, but they should be. Every human should be pursuing, you know, growth and being a better person each day, and well-rounded and growing spiritually and taking care of their mind, body, and soul. You know? And
unfortunately, sometimes, you know, the butterfly is thrown that picture of when he was an ugly caterpillar, and they don't let that butterfly ever bask in the fact that now they're this beautiful butterfly. They're like, oh man, look what you used to be, you know?
That's right.
The point is, look what I've become.
Yeah.
And that's really what I try to strive for, you know, what I have become and what I can still become.
Beautiful.
In the future, you know.
Well, I appreciate that, man, and thank you for all your work and spreading awareness all over the world, and
appreciate it.
And being a stand-up guy, and you know, spreading positivity, man.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to connect, brother.
Yeah, brother.
Much love.
Yeah, you too,
all right,
man.
brother.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Cool.
Subscribe, like, share, follow. You know the routine. Thanks for listening.